I'd like to focus in on a little bit on the difference between community resilience and household resilience. And I think one of the things that is important, and I totally agree with Chris and Mark and others, that the interrelationship between these different levels is important to understand. The drivers that can affect people's ability to be resilient can occur at these different levels, and so as part of your problem analysis, you need to really understand that. And some of those things you're going to be able to work on. Some of those things you're not going to be able to work on because they might be at a level that is beyond the capacity of your organization to work on. But it's important to look at these different levels as to where the major constraints that are preventing people from being resilient are occurring. Now, one of the things that from one of our earlier meetings, I think it was 3 meetings ago, we kind of felt that there wasn't a lot of good information on how to measure community resilience. And so I was asked by Feed the Future to actually put together a think piece on how you would actually go about measuring community resilience. And so those of you who haven't seen the paper, maybe most of you have, but if you haven't, it's on AgriLinks, and it's under community resilience. But so the story goes like this. I would lay awake at night and I was trying to figure out, well, what is really different between communities resilience and household resilience? Is it just the accumulative addition of all the households that are resilient that makes a community resilient, or is it something different? And scratching my head and waking up at 3 in the morning with one of those aha. Well, what was really different for me is collective action. You need more than one person to have collective action, okay? You need more than one household probably to have collective action. So collective action is the real determinant that's different between community resilience and household resilience. Then I was trying to think, well, what are some of the collective actions that people do that actually help make them more resilient? And so I was thinking, okay, well, one function that communities do is they try to make sure that anybody that's exposed to a shock or a major stress is taken care of, so that there's a social protection piece of collective action. There's resources that communities have access to, common property, whether it be pastoral land or other land that they're using. And if they take care of that land, the natural resources, then that's a form of collective action. There are certain public goods in terms of infrastructure, schools, clinics, roads, that don't belong to one individual, but they belong to the community. And so how well they take care of those public goods is a form of collective action that's important for resilience. Because if they allow the building to deteriorate, they can't get the teacher there, no longer will be able to teach the kids. If they let the clinic fall apart, the health guys don't come back. So there's an important, or if they don't repair the road, it'll be difficult to get to market, etc. The third part of collective action has to do with managing conflict, which is extremely important in your setting. So those communities that are able to have conflict committees or can engage more in managing this conflict with other communities probably are going to be a little bit more resilient than those that don't. And then finally, did I get them all? Oh, there's collective action around disaster risk reduction. So if you were to, a lot of the work that ECHO and OFDA and others engage in is to try to strengthen people's ability to not only have indigenous early warning systems that tell them things are getting worse, they understand their risk environment better, but actually also try to mitigate those things in various ways. So you need collective action to be able to do that, whether it's cleaning out dikes or building protection, or even building grain stores so that you can get through the bad periods. There are different ways to do it. So okay, this list could go on, but I thought there's 5 big ones. Let's see if those are important ones. So then I thought, well, okay, people are always trying to figure out, well, what indicators should we be looking at if we were looking at? So in the paper, you'll see that we identify 3 or 4 indicators that are out there that kind of capture each of these dimensions of collective action. So our idea was that you could create, and these indicators are going to be very context specific. So you need to work through participatory techniques with communities to figure out which sets of indicators capture those different types of collective action. Then you can score a community on the basis of those indicators for each of those types of collective action. And you can actually create a collective action score that tells you this community would be better off than that community in being able to organize itself. So it doesn't, when I say that you can quantify some of this stuff, it doesn't mean how important this qualitative work is to understanding that. There are going to be some dimensions of community resilience, particularly around collective action, that are not quantifiable, that you really need to understand. These relationships, the depth of these relationships are not easily quantifiable. So I think you need both quantitative and qualitative approaches to do this. But what we did then was we said, okay, here's a potential way to measure this. And so we've actually gone out and done this in the Somali region of Ethiopia to see if it holds up. Well, what was interesting when we actually collected this data was that it seemed to be pretty predicted. Where you had very low collective action, the ability to manage shocks against those outcomes that we were interested in weren't as high as in places where you had much stronger collective action. So, of course, we need much more evidence to see if that really holds up over time or in different locations. But I think what's exciting for me is that here we can start to graph something that's fairly easy for you guys to collect, but it helps us look at these relationships between things. Now, you can get more sophisticated on the statistics. We're about, again, in the paper, we talk about more sophisticated analytical models that you would use to look at the relationship between collective action or community resilience and household resilience. Because one of the things you want to know is does higher community resilience actually also mean higher household resilience? And it's not a straightforward relationship. Let me give you an example. There are many places in Africa, and particularly in this region, where sometimes individual resilience is sacrificed for collective resilience. And it's because it's the group as a whole that needs to survive, not just individual household wealth or household assets. And so you have a leveling mechanism in place to re-spread out assets so everybody is better off, not just one individual. Now, that can kind of work against individual resilience by itself because you want everybody to do well, not just one person. And so, so it doesn't always mean that when you have good community resilience, you're necessarily going to have good household resilience. This came out in a study that we did in 2007 in Ethiopia when we were trying to look at the two together. So I think what's important here is that there are measures for it. They are different. And in fact, one of the things that came out in the technical working group that I think was a really important insight is when you talk about these different systems levels or different levels, the outcome measures and the capacities that are important will differ for each of those levels. Okay, so we're primarily interested in household resilience in most cases. So we're interested in the kinds of capacities that allow households to meet certain well-being outcomes in the face of shocks and stresses. But if you're interested in community resilience, you might be looking at different kinds of things, different types of capacities, and different kinds of outcomes. If you're interested in these higher systems levels, like markets or the ecology, or the environment, you have different sets of outcomes that you're looking at and different sets of capacities. So how you measure these things, whether you're trying to look at resilience at this level or at this level or at this level, what you use for capacities and what you use for outcomes are going to differ. Now, it doesn't mean that we don't use a systems perspective when we're trying to understand household resilience or community resilience. You want to, as I said before, if you would do a good hazard analysis, good holistic assessment at the beginning, and you identify key drivers that are affecting these households and communities, they might be these higher systems level drivers that are having the effect. You want to make sure you monitor those things to see if things are changing because they might be the major factor that's preventing people from being resilient. So Chris's model is important to understand that what you look for in terms of determinants and what you look for in terms of actually trying to achieve resilience at that level are slightly different perspectives. It's important for you to understand it. Don't confuse those two, because a lot of the dialogue is confusing between those two things. How to promote resilience at a different level, and how that different level actually is a determinant of the level you're interested in. Okay? I think I'll stop there.
I'm going to actually just read out the last question first, because I think it's quite an interesting question. Don't indicators of collective action reflect resilience as it used to be, not the economic and social transformation required to make Somalia resilient in the future? Would you like me to read it again?
No, I got it. Well, I don't necessarily think that's, I don't necessarily believe that. I think that communities do try to take care of themselves. Other people in the community, they do try to manage their natural, if they don't manage their natural resources effectively, they aren't going to be very resilient for very long. If they don't take care of their public goods, they're not going to be resilient for very long. Now, what might be causing communities to not be resilient, you know, what we're confusing here is the cause of the problem with the outcome that we're interested in. And I think the drivers could be completely different now than what they used to be in the past, but you still want to make sure that you capture these dimensions of collective action. Because I think they're being able to manage conflict, being able to take care of public goods, being able to manage your natural resources, being able to have safety nets that operate within communities, being able to manage disasters in the short term are all going to be important into the future. Is it what? Realistic in South-Central Somalia, to aim at collective action. Well, you know, it's interesting, and Dan and John can talk more to this, but you know, social capital and collective action is extremely important in the results of the studies that they've been working on, I think. Now, we didn't talk about all the different kinds of social capital that are important, you know, whether it's social capital, the bounded social capital within a community, or the bridging social capital that allows you to connect to other communities or to individuals that go to other contexts to work. All of those are going to be important for being able to manage shocks and stresses. So, you know, I think that collective action is going to be important.